Good evening, everybody. All right. So here's a hot topic that I know I'm probably going to get a lot of heat for even discussing. All right. So once again, like everybody else, I do my pointing and clicking, and I see some articles regarding should America give up its guns. Let's get into it. So there's two sides to the story right here. So make sure you're cussing so you're not looking at a black screen. All right, there we go. Now I'm talking. All right, let's exit out of that. So here's one. So why Americans should consider 18 good reasons. Okay, that's a stockpile of guns there. Hoarders. All right, so their logic is fewer guns mean fewer gun deaths in America. Well, no shit. But they think it could save thousands of American lives every year. Now, to be fair, we do have a problem. We do have a gun problem. I'm not fucking denying that. So their take is homes without guns, especially for kids, safe and blah blah blah. Kids can't find it. We've seen those commercials. You know, he had his gun so well hidden it took his son 6 years to find it. You know, the point, a 6-year-old kid found his gun, and yeah, you know where I'm going with that. Um, I support the Second Amendment, but I am by no means like a gun nut. And of course, police in America fear that anyone they meet might have. They have guns too, and just because they have guns doesn't mean it can't be taken from them. I covered this in a previous video where up in Mass, you know, it was before the pandemic. You know, a sergeant, you know, was killed by his own gun. You know, he responded to a call. You know, an erratic guy throwing rocks and stuff at, you know, people's apartments or whatever. And sure enough, the guy fucking, you know, hides in the bushes and does a fucking Rambo ambush attack, you know, with a rock. You know, beans the rock off the cop's head, then takes the cop's own gun and kills him with it. Where are the fucking anti-gun people there? The cop had a gun. He was killed with a gun. Make that shit make sense. And obviously, now to be fair, school shoot, that is a definite real issue. Without guns, the threat would disappear. Well, oh shit. What about other threats? What about other threats? And yes, protests, they can turn dangerous even without guns. Like, why the fuck are there fucking armed protesters? Yeah, many other countries, yeah, they do find it strange and scary, but, you know, we're not the only country in the world that allows its citizens to own a gun. I've talked with many people, tease away on dating sites, you know, from different countries, and they say, you know, they're allowed to own one. It's not a right, but it's more like a privilege, like driving a car. You know, they're strictly regulated on, you know, what they can have. And, you know, even here, you know, a law-abiding citizen is regulated what he or she can have. Activities like hunting, safe equipment. Okay, now what about a fucking bow and arrow? All right, so I mean, obviously they don't go as far, and you know, unless you're that one exhibit shooter, Lars Anderson, you know, the only person who probably could do a mass shooting with a bow and arrow. I mean, you know, with that logic, used with guns, if they get rid of guns, what are they going to fucking use? They're going to use something. They're going to do something else. And just yanking them out from law-abiding citizens, is it going to solve the problem? Like, why don't they fucking, go after the fucking gangbangers? When they start fucking going after gangbangers, then maybe I could see this argument. But the problem with the anti-gun is that they're targeting the law-abiding citizens. And that's the problem. So let's read this one. Okay, one of those are Americans. So, yep. Unintended risks. Okay, well, be responsible with it. It's that fucking simple. Suicide rates are higher. Where did they get the data? Gun suicides are almost always for duh. But okay, yeah. So they're gonna fucking pull on that leg too. I don't want to get into that, but yeah, they're pulling at everybody's fucking. They're really tugging at people's strings for this shit. And again, until they can find a way to yank it from every fucking gangbang, every criminal that doesn't follow laws, then there's really nothing to talk about. And to be fair, they do have less mass shootings, but what about non-mass shootings? And I talk to people in other countries where they don't own guns, and there's a fucking shooting every day. I mean, look at the fucking drug cartels; they fucking shoot people. Can people in Mexico own guns? What about the Middle East? Are people in Middle Eastern countries allowed to own guns? I didn't think so. Okay, guns don't always make you safer. There is an element of truth to that. Now I'm gonna tell you why, and I've said this in other videos. If you apply to get a firearm and you take the firearms, training course, what should be encompassed in that course is learning unarmed combat, particularly focused on weapon retention. Not the whole, martial arts instructor that can teach you how to disarm a guy with a gun, but weapon retention. And, I can borrow from, various styles, probably, it'll probably most like, MMA geared sort of stuff, MMA geared, tactics. So that's that. And, again, like I said before, policemen, they get their guns taken from them too. Children out of the victim. Yeah, they're pulling at your strings. And unfortunately, that's true. And unfortunately, that's actually very true. We've seen it happen. I wish that weren't the case. But the real question is, how the fuck are they getting these guns? And, I will be the first to admit that, the choice of weapon might make a little bit of a difference. But, we've seen domestic terrorism with bombs, and nobody fucking blamed the bomb. Case in point, Oklahoma City. Case in point, Boston Marathon, 2013. They had guns with them, but it wasn't the gun that killed people. And, I'm going to take this one's word for it. England has gun control. Australia, they have gun control. I do believe you're still allowed to own one, but I imagine you have to meet very strict criteria. And I think in England, I don't think you can own one for protection. I think it has to be something more or less, like an antique. But, again, they probably still have gun crimes, maybe not as much as we do here, but they still have them. And there's also other crimes that never gets talked about. So this is the heated debate. guns. They always want to blame the gun. Yep, domestic violence. It's not the only one. Since a domestic violence situation, they'll find some other way in. Police face increased danger. Well, that's what they signed up for. Gun violence. Well, I mean, no shit, because they're fucking exposed to other people of the same ethnicity who are gangbangers with guns that they shouldn't be having. Oh, this is bullet. Second Amendment out. Really? Really? So, yep. So, let's get into this next one. Okay, 15 reasons. So, the last one I'm going to show you, guns are stupid. Do you really think you're going to get every fucking gun out of every fucking American? Or everybody? Sure, let's assume they repeal the Second Amendment and make it so American citizens can't have guns. Let's assume they did that, right? Guess who they're going to overlook? The fucking gangbangers. And guess what? With the current regime, it's just going to make a fucking unarmed population an easily controlled one. All right. So, all right. That's a lot of firearms, and yes, it is pretty doomed. And yeah, it would be impractical. And no, it won't solve an epidemic because there's just so many of them. And maybe it got out of hand at some point. And yeah, I mean, people do have a right to be angry when they're misused. And this is one saying, we could see more shootings. So this one sounds like, they're too much of a gun nut organization, but I'm going to read it anyways. Yeah, we see even more shootings. Look at the Wild West. And, contrary to belief, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Wild West wasn't when it was cracked up to be in the movies. And everybody had a gun. And, it's a gang issue, so that's what they're saying. That's exactly. It's not a gun issue, it's a gang issue. And, stolen, they're obtained illegally. And again, you take them away from a law-abiding citizen who has that one chance to defend him or herself from a crook with a gun, then it's just going to fucking defeat the purpose. So let's see here. Yep, other ones. DUI. So there is the dragging and other stuff. One person every day. Yeah, we don't hear about it because, again, the topic is guns. But I would like to see gun deaths versus other deaths. An accident, DUI, some other weapon like a bomb, a knife. I would like to see comparison. Okay, yeah, this one. So what happened? So what I'd like to know is what happened to all these people, who did these mass shootings. Like what allowed them to actually even be able to get a hold of them? The guns, I mean, to be able to pull this off. We would stop the next Paddock. that could certainly be up for debate. But how prohibition could work. I mean, we saw what happened with the Prohibition Act. They made fucking moonshine. In the 1920s. You had the Italian mafia. All right, so let's take a look at this last one. So this one is some guy's response to all the 18 reasons. Reasons to the contrary. So this is his response. So again, as you might think, if homes were free from those firearms, we would need that kind of danger in their lives. Your ability to defend yourself. And now we're living in a time where it is very imperative that you have the ability to defend yourself. And of course, all the other examples. This is basically somebody who wants to self-delete. They're going to find a way. Obviously a gun is just pretty wet, but you get my point. And they end up in schools, so that certainly is a valid claim. Because somehow they just ended up in schools. So bad holding young adults. And of course you can't type. Save lives. Yeah, learn how to type if you're gonna fucking argue the contrary, at least. So there we have it. So yep, I think this guy definitely needs to they're trained to defend themselves. So yeah, just like I'm saying, they take it, and they're also wearing bulletproof vests. And just my point. Lock it up. Don't leave in the car. Basically something that everybody should really take very seriously, because it's a different mindset when you own one. So yep. So this is very interesting. I mean, they're definitely so there definitely is a problem with the amount of firearms circling. I'm not denying that. It wouldn't just be fewer guns, could be fewer headlines. My gun never hurt anybody. Guns don't kill. Deranged people kill. Yeah, and he's right. It's somebody who's got a few screws loose. Guns right. People find, oh yeah, nice baseball bats. Yep, they're gonna do it. I mean, just like I said, I was fucking chilling with a peep who I've done a couple collabs with. I was getting ready to leave, and I see a guy laying on the street, stabbed a bunch of times. There was no gun. So yeah, they'll find a way. And it was in fucking broad daylight. Fucking subtle as fuck. There was no guns, so you're not gonna hear a bang. It was a fucking subtle. Nobody was yelling and screaming. So, yep, this is definitely okay. Yep, I can certainly see that, but the parents have to be responsible if you're going to own one, and that's the problem. Is a lot of these people just don't take the responsibility seriously as they should. And well, yeah, I mean, can turn it bad as well. So can any other weapon. So and that's the thing. I'm not going to read the rest of this stuff, because I've gone into enough detail. But that article just kind of grabbed my interest. 18 reasons that we should give up our guns. I mean, come on, yeah, good luck with that. I mean, it's just the environment that we live in, and because it's been a part of our history, and it's in the Second Amendment, which is a right. So to me, that means that the only permit or license you really need is the fucking U.S. Constitution. But that's just my opinion. And I'd be willing to wager that if everybody had the same stuff as the gangbangers, and the gangbangers tried to break in, they know that they would be, yeah, they wouldn't stand a chance. And but that might be a bad example because they think they're invincible anyways. And all it really takes is just somebody else with his or her gun drawn at the right time, another gangbanger. And, we all know how nobody fucking complains about gun violence when it's a gangbanger on a gangbanger. Make it make sense. It's still it's still another human being. Now, obviously, if it if it's children, then yeah, that's definitely gonna fucking get people upset, and I totally don't blame them. But I think they should have fucking put more protection around schools long before any fucking shooting ever took place. So again, that would be some type of gun control issue. But it shouldn't have taken Columbine to really start triggering stuff like metal detectors. Anyhow, that's just my 2 cents. I I definitely don't think that banning guns is going to solve the problem that we have here in America. You know, when they go after all the gangbangers, and with that same logic, they make it so the police that walk the beat don't have them, then maybe we can have this conversation. I'll talk to you.